3 hours after he deleted everything, the glass walls of our conference room shook from federal agents pounding on the door. But to understand that moment when everyone in the meeting went white as paper, you need to know what happened before, how I quietly kept what he thought was gone forever and waited for the perfect moment to strike. My name is Lauren Hayes, and I've spent the last decade as a data integrity specialist at Stratagem Solutions, a private cybersecurity firm that handles sensitive contracts for everyone from Fortune 500 companies to federal agencies. At 34, I'd built a reputation as the gatekeeper, the one who ensured our data vault remained pristine, traceable, and legally bulletproof. I'd worked with the FBI on money laundering cases, helped the SEC untangle corporate fraud, and maintained chains of custody that held up in federal court. My job wasn't glamorous, but it was essential, or at least, it used to be. Everything changed the Monday. Ethan Cole walked through our doors. He swept into the conference room at 9:05 a.m. sharp, all gleaming cufflinks and practiced smile, trailing the scent of expensive cologne and disruption. Our CEO introduced him as the new VP of Operations, brought in to optimize workflows and eliminate redundancies. I watched from my usual spot in the corner, notebook open, pen ready. 20 years of corporate speak had taught me that optimization usually meant someone was about to gut something important. "I've reviewed your processes," Ethan announced, his eyes scanning the room like a predator surveying territory. "We're sitting on terabytes of redundant data, multiple backup layers, versioning systems that go back years. It's excessive." My pen stopped moving. Those weren't redundancies. They were safeguards. "The multi-tier backup system is a federal compliance requirement," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We handle classified data. The retention policies can be streamlined," he interrupted, flashing that consultant smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm not suggesting we violate regulations, Ms. Hayes, Lauren Hayes. Ms. Hayes, I'm simply proposing we eliminate unnecessary duplication. Storage costs alone are bleeding us dry." I could have explained that our storage costs were a fraction of what we'd pay in federal fines if we lost critical data. I could have mentioned the 3 ongoing investigations that relied on our archived records. Instead, I wrote down his exact words in my notebook: eliminate unnecessary duplication. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. The meeting continued with Ethan outlining his vision for efficiency. Every suggestion chipped away at the careful infrastructure I'd spent years building. Authentication protocols, cumbersome, audit trails, excessive documentation, the cold redundancy site, an expensive insurance policy we'll never use. I kept writing, capturing every word, every dismissive gesture. My colleagues nodded along, seduced by promises of streamlined workflows and bigger bonuses. They didn't see what I saw: a man systematically identifying every safety net in our system. After the meeting, I stayed behind, pretending to organize my notes while Ethan collected his pristine leather portfolio. "You seem concerned, Ms. Hayes," he said, not looking up. "I've been here 10 years. These systems exist for good reasons." He finally met my eyes, and something cold flickered there. 10 years is a long time to do things the same way. Sometimes fresh perspective is exactly what a company needs. That night, I went home and did something I'd never done before. I created a personal backup system, an encrypted drive, completely separate from company resources. Call it paranoia, but I'd learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Ethan work his particular brand of corporate magic. He was smooth. I'd give him that. Every cut was framed as progress. Every protection removed was modernization. He held lunch meetings with department heads, won them over with talks of efficiency bonuses and lean operations. But I noticed things others missed. The way he'd steer conversations away from compliance questions, how he'd schedule system changes for Friday afternoons when most of the senior staff had left, the careful way he documented his initiatives, always framing them as group decisions, never leaving his fingerprints clearly on any single choice. I started my own documentation, screenshots of system configurations before his changes, copies of compliance certificates, a detailed log of every alteration to our data protection protocols, all stored safely on my personal encrypted drive. updated daily at 6:45 p.m. after everyone else had gone home. The feeling of unease grew heavier each day, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, but I kept my concerns to myself, kept taking notes, kept backing up everything I could, because I'd learned something in my years as a data specialist: the most dangerous threats don't announce themselves. They smile, shake your hand, and systematically dismantle your defenses while assuring you it's for your own good. Ethan Cole was that kind of threat, and I was the only one who seemed to notice. The dismantling began in week 3. Ethan started with what he called low-hanging fruit, the daily verification protocols I'd implemented for our classified data transfers. "Do we really need 3-factor authentication for internal moves?" he asked during a department meeting, his tone suggesting the answer was obvious. "It's slowing down productivity." I pulled up the metrics. Those protocols prevented 14 unauthorized access attempts last quarter alone, the 10 seconds they add. "Could be better spent on actual work," he finished, already typing on his laptop. "I'm reducing it to single-factor for internal transfers. We'll monitor the situation." Monitor the situation. Corporate speak for wait until something goes wrong. By week 4, he'd gutted half our verification processes. The automated integrity checks that ran every 6 hours, reduced to once daily. The requirement for dual approval on data deletions. Bureaucratic bottleneck, the versioning system that kept 7 iterations of every file, cut to 3. I documented everything. Every email where he overrode security concerns. Every Slack message where he dismissed my warnings as paranoid overthinking. Every meeting where he assured the board that we were becoming leaner and more agile. "You worry too much, Lauren," he told me one afternoon, finding me in the server room where I was manually backing up critical files. It was 4:30 p.m., and most of the office had already started their weekend. "It's my job to worry," I replied, not looking up from the terminal. "Your job is to manage data, not hoard it." He leaned against the doorframe, watching me work. "I've noticed you spending a lot of time on these manual backups. That's what automated systems are for." "The automated systems you've been streamlining." His smile tightened. "I'm trying to help you. Lauren, this attachment to outdated methods, it's not a good look. Forward-thinking team members embrace change." The threat was subtle but clear. I saved the backup log and turned to face him. "I embrace change that makes sense. This doesn't..." "Then perhaps you need to adjust your perspective." He straightened his tie, a gesture I'd learned meant he was done pretending to listen. "I'd hate to see someone with your experience become redundant." That night, I stayed until 11:45 p.m., systematically copying every piece of data I could access onto my encrypted drives. Not just the files themselves, but the metadata, the access logs, the modification histories. I photographed the server configuration screens. I exported the audit trails. I even saved the mundane stuff email threads about coffee supplies and vacation schedules, because in my experience, you never knew what detail might matter later. The next week, Ethan escalated. He announced a storage optimization initiative that involved purging any data older than 18 months. When I protested that we had legal obligations to maintain 7-year records, he produced a conveniently narrow interpretation of the regulations. "That applies to final reports, not working data," he explained to the assembled team. "We're wasting resources storing every draft, every iteration, every redundant backup." "Those aren't redundant," I insisted. "They're evidence trails. If there's ever a question about data manipulation..." "Are you suggesting someone here would manipulate data?" His voice carried just enough incredulity to make me sound paranoid. "I'm suggesting we follow established best practices." "Best practices evolve, Ms. Hayes, so should we." The purge was scheduled for the following Friday. I spent every evening that week creating shadow copies, hiding them in nested folders with innocuous names: Budget Projections Q3 Draft, Office Supply Inventory 2023. Names that would never attract attention, containing data that might one day save us all. My Slack messages with concerned colleagues mysteriously disappeared from the company server. When I mentioned it to IT, they shrugged. "System glitch. Ethan's been optimizing the message retention settings." I started taking photos of my screen with my personal phone. The Thursday before the purge, I found Ethan in my office, sitting at my desk, typing on my computer. "Can I help you?" I kept my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Just checking your storage usage." He didn't even look embarrassed. "You're using 3 times the allocated space. We need to discuss your hoarding problem." "That's not hoarding. That's called doing my job." He stood, smoothing his jacket. "Your job is what I say it is, and I say it's time to let go of the past. Tomorrow's purge will include your local drives. I suggest you prepare accordingly." That night, I didn't go home. I worked until 4:15 a.m., copying everything onto external drives I'd purchased with my own money, terabytes of data flowing through USB ports, progress bars crawling across my screen while I watched the parking lot for signs of security. By morning, I had it all, every file, every log, every piece of evidence that might one day matter, hidden, encrypted, safe from Ethan's efficiency crusade. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was overreacting. I had no idea how right I was to be afraid. The death blow came on a Friday afternoon in March. I'd just returned from lunch to find an email marked Urgent Streamlining Initiative, Phase 3 sitting in my inbox. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The attached PDF was titled Comprehensive Data Optimization Plan. 15 pages of corporate doublespeak that boiled down to one horrifying directive: complete elimination of all backup data repositories deemed redundant by the new efficiency metrics, effective immediately. I read it twice, certain I was misunderstanding, but there it was, buried in subsection 4.2. All historical backup archives predating the current fiscal year will be permanently deleted to optimize storage costs and system performance. Those weren't just old files. Those archives contained evidence for 3 ongoing federal investigations, including a major money laundering case I'd been supporting for the DOJ. I printed the document and walked straight to the conference room where Ethan was holding his weekly innovation session. He looked up as I entered, that practiced smile sliding into place. "Lauren, we're in the middle of..." "We need to talk about this." I dropped the printout on the table. "Now." His smile never wavered. "Of course. Everyone, let's take 5. When the room cleared, I didn't wait for him to spin his narrative. "You can't delete those archives. We have active federal subpoenas requiring us to maintain that data. I've reviewed our legal obligations thoroughly." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Those subpoenas specify active case files, not redundant backups." "Redundant. Those backups are our chain of custody. If the primary files are ever compromised..." "Why would they be compromised?" His voice carried that dangerous smoothness I'd learned to fear. "Unless you're suggesting our security is inadequate." "I'm suggesting that destroying evidence in federal cases is a felony." The word felony finally cracked his composure. His jaw tightened. "Be very careful. Ms. Hayes, unfounded accusations about criminal activity could be considered defamation." "It's not unfounded if it's true." He stood, straightening papers with deliberate calm. "The board has approved this initiative. The deletion is scheduled for 5 p.m. today. If you have concerns, I suggest you document them through proper channels." His smile returned, sharp as glass. "Though I should mention, your position is under review as part of our restructuring. It would be unfortunate if your resistance to progress influenced that review." I left the conference room with my hands shaking, not from fear, from rage, and from the certainty that Ethan Cole wasn't just incompetent, he was hiding something. I returned to my office and locked the door, pulled up the archives slated for deletion, started cross-referencing them with our active federal cases. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 files had been modified in the past week. Tiny changes, a few altered timestamps, some adjusted transaction amounts. The kind of modifications that would be invisible unless you were looking for them. But I was looking, and I could see the fingerprints of manipulation all over the data that was about to be destroyed. I documented everything: screenshots with hash values, modification logs showing Ethan's admin credentials, a clear trail of evidence that someone was sanitizing data before destroying the originals. At 4 p.m., Ethan sent a broadcast email. "The optimization protocol will commence in 60 minutes. All department heads have signed off on this initiative." Attached was a signature page. My name was on it. My signature forged, approving the destruction of evidence I'd spent months protecting. I sat at my desk, staring at that forged signature, and made a decision. I couldn't stop him from deleting the company's copies, but I could make sure those weren't the only copies that existed. I opened my encrypted drive. Every file marked for deletion already lived there, pristine and unmodified. I added today's evidence, the forged signature, the modification logs, the email trail. Then I created a new folder, Insurance Policy. Inside, I placed a detailed timeline of Ethan's actions, my concerns, and the federal case numbers that would be affected by the deletion. At 4:45 p.m., Ethan appeared at my door with 2 security guards. "I'm revoking your system access. Effective immediately. Please step away from your computer." "On what grounds?" "Insubordination. Failure to support company initiatives. Creating a hostile work environment." He held out his hand. "Your badge, please." I stood slowly, maintaining eye contact. "I'll need that in writing." "It's already been sent to your personal email." His smile was triumphant. "Security will escort you out. You can collect your personal items on Monday." I handed over my badge, picked up my purse, and left my laptop sitting open on my desk. Let him think he'd won. Let him believe I'd been completely cut off. He had no idea that everything I needed was already safely tucked away on encrypted drives in my apartment, waiting. As security walked me to my car, I saw Ethan through the conference room window, already at my computer, no doubt ensuring I hadn't left any inconvenient backups on the local drive. At exactly 5 p.m., as I sat in my car in the parking lot, I watched the lights in the server room flicker. The massive purge had begun. Terabytes of data vanishing into digital oblivion, evidence disappearing, crimes being covered. I started my car and drove home, my phone already buzzing with messages from confused colleagues. I ignored them all. There would be time for explanations later. For now, I had evidence to organize and a crime to document. Because Ethan Cole had just made the biggest mistake of his life, he thought he'd deleted the evidence. He'd only deleted his copies. Monday morning arrived with an email that made my blood freeze. A former colleague, Rita, had forwarded me something from her personal account. "Lauren, thought you should see this. They're fast-tracking the Defense Corps contract." Defense Corps, a $20 million defense contractor deal that required verified transaction histories going back 5 years. Transaction histories that Ethan had just deleted. I called Rita immediately. "Tell me they're not submitting the data today." "This afternoon," she whispered. "Ethan's been in since 6 a.m., reconstructing the required files. He says the originals were corrupted in Friday's system optimization." Reconstructing. My hands tightened on the phone. "Rita, I need you to do something for me. Can you access the submission portal?" "Maybe for another hour. They're revoking my credentials at noon. I gave notice after what happened to you. Check the MD5 hash on whatever files Ethan's uploading. Compare them to these." I read her a string of numbers from my encrypted drive, the hash values of the original, unmodified files. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then, Jesus Christ, Lauren, they don't match, not even close. My suspicions crystallized into certainty. Ethan wasn't just incompetent or reckless. He was actively falsifying data for a federal defense contract. "Document everything you can," I told her. "Screenshots, hash values, timestamps, send them to your personal email before noon." "This is illegal, isn't it, what he's doing?" "It's about to be their problem, not yours. Just get me the evidence." I spent the next 3 hours in my home office, cross-referencing the data I'd saved with what Rita was sending. The alterations were subtle but systematic. Transaction amounts adjusted by fractions of percentages. Dates shifted by days or weeks. All pointing toward one conclusion: someone was washing money through our systems, and Ethan was covering their tracks. At 2:15 p.m., Rita sent her final message. "Submission complete. Ethan just uploaded everything to the federal portal. God help us all." I stared at my screens, at the terabytes of evidence spread across multiple drives. The moment those falsified files hit the federal system, Stratagem Solutions had committed fraud against the United States government. And thanks to Ethan's forged signature page, I was supposedly complicit. Time to create my own insurance policy. I compiled everything into a single encrypted archive, original files with hash values and timestamps. the modified versions Ethan had submitted, modification logs showing his admin access, the forged approval document, email chains documenting my objections, a detailed timeline of events. Then I wrote a letter, not to law enforcement, not yet, to myself, future dated and stored in multiple secure locations, explaining everything that had happened. If something happened to me, if Ethan tried to make me disappear like he'd made the data disappear, the truth would survive. At 4 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Hayes, this is Special Agent Sarah Valdez with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We need to discuss your involvement with Stratagem Solutions. My heart hammered. I'm listening. We've been monitoring certain transactions flowing through your company's systems. This afternoon, we received a data submission that raised immediate red flags. Your name is on the approval documentation. That signature was forged. I was terminated on Friday specifically for opposing the deletion of that data. A pause. You opposed it. I have documentation proving that. And Agent Valdez, I also have copies of the original files, the real ones, before they were modified. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Finally, how soon can you meet with us? I can be at your office in an hour. Should I bring counsel? That's your choice. But Ms. Hayes, if you have what you say you have, you're not our target, you're our witness. I ended the call and immediately backed up everything to 3 more locations: cloud storage, physical drives, encrypted email attachments sent to my attorney, paranoid maybe, but Ethan had taught me that paranoia was just another word for preparation. As I gathered my evidence, I thought about the Defense Corps contract, about the federal investigators who would be combing through those falsified files within hours, about Ethan, probably sitting in his office right now, confident that he'd covered his tracks. He had no idea what was coming. The federal government didn't appreciate being lied to, and they really didn't appreciate fraud involving defense contracts. I locked my apartment, evidence drives secured in my bag, and headed for my car. As I drove toward the FBI field office, I allowed myself one small smile. Ethan thought he'd been so clever, deleting all the evidence of his crimes. But he'd forgotten the first rule of data management: nothing is ever truly deleted, not if someone who knows what they're doing is paying attention. And I'd been paying very close attention. The trap hadn't been sprung yet, but the bait was in place, the falsified data sitting in federal systems like a ticking bomb. All that remained was for someone to notice the discrepancies. And with what I was about to hand the FBI, they wouldn't have to look very hard. Ethan Cole was about to learn why you don't mess with the person who controls your data. Tuesday morning brought chaos to Stratagem Solutions. I heard about it through Rita's frantic texts while I sat in a federal building, reviewing evidence with Agent Valdez and her team. Emergency all-hands meeting at 9 a.m. Ethan looks like death. Something about the Defense Corps contract. The federal verification system had flagged the discrepancies within 18 hours. Automated algorithms designed to detect fraud had lit up like Christmas trees when Ethan's modified data hit their servers. Now Defense Corps was demanding answers, and Stratagem was scrambling. Agent Valdez looked up from her laptop where she'd been comparing hash values. Your former employer just received a formal notice of investigation. They have 72 hours to provide original documentation for all submitted data. Original documentation that no longer existed, thanks to Ethan's efficiency initiative. What's their exposure? I asked. If they can't produce the original's contract termination, fines starting at $3 million, possible criminal charges for the executives who signed off on the submission. She pulled up another screen. Speaking of which, we need to discuss this approval document with your signature. I'd already walked them through the forgery, but now we went deeper. Font analysis showed subtle differences from my actual signature. The metadata revealed it had been created after my termination. Small details that proved I'd been set up as a potential fall guy. My phone buzzed. Another text from Rita. Ethan just blamed the data corruption on your sabotage before leaving. Says you must have tampered with files before they fired you. I showed the message to Agent Valdez. She actually smiled. He's panicking, making mistakes. Good. By noon, the situation at Stratagem had deteriorated further. The company's legal team had discovered the full scope of what Ethan had done, not just the Defense Corps fraud, but the systematic deletion of evidence in 3 other federal cases. Rita reported that the general counsel had been seen leaving the building in tears. "They're calling in a forensic data recovery firm," she texted, "offering $50,000 for anyone who can recover the deleted files." I thought about the drives in the FBI evidence locker, containing every single file they were desperately seeking. $50,000 wouldn't begin to cover the damage Ethan had done. At 2:30 p.m., something unexpected happened. Agent Valdez received a call that made her expression darken. "Cole just contacted his lawyer. He wants to make a deal." "Already?" "He's claiming he was pressured by someone higher up. Says he has evidence of a broader conspiracy." My mind raced. Ethan wasn't smart enough to orchestrate this alone. The money laundering, the systematic data manipulation, someone had been using him. "I need to see my files again," I said. "There's something I want to check." They brought me back to the evidence. I pulled up the transaction logs I'd saved, but this time I looked deeper, not at what had been changed, but at the patterns in the original data. Small, consistent anomalies dating back 2 years, long before Ethan arrived. "Agent Valdez," I called. "I think Ethan was brought in specifically to cover this up. Look at these patterns." She studied the data, her expression growing grimmer. "This goes back to, damn, the previous CFO, the one who retired suddenly last year." The pieces clicked into place. A long-term embezzlement scheme, someone high up getting nervous, Ethan brought in to destroy the evidence under the guise of efficiency, and me, the careful data guardian, marked for removal when I wouldn't play along. "We need those names from Cole," Valdez muttered, "before whoever's behind this realizes the walls are closing in." At 4 p.m., Ethan's lawyer arrived at the federal building. I watched through security monitors as they escorted him to an interview room. He looked haggard, his perfect corporate polish cracked and peeling. "They want you to attend the interview," Valdez told me. "Not in the room, but observing. Your knowledge of the data might help us catch him in lies." I sat in the observation room, watching Ethan fidget in his chair. Gone was the smooth executive who'd systematically dismantled our protections. This was a frightened man realizing he'd been played. His lawyer spoke first. "My client is willing to cooperate fully in exchange for consideration regarding charges." "That depends on what he has to offer," the lead investigator replied. Ethan leaned forward. "I was hired by board member Marcus Webb. He said the company needed someone to clean up legacy issues before the Defense Corps contract. I thought he meant inefficiencies." "When did you realize it was more than that?" "When he gave me a list of specific files to delete, transaction records, communication logs. He said they were redundant, but—" Ethan swallowed hard. "The patterns were too specific, too targeted." "And you deleted them anyway." "He said if I didn't, they'd find someone who would, and that person might not be as careful about protecting the company's other interests." I almost laughed at the irony. Ethan thought he'd been protecting the company while destroying evidence of federal crimes. The interview continued for 2 hours. Ethan named names, provided email chains, outlined the full scope of the conspiracy. Marcus Webb and 2 other board members had been siphoning money through defense contracts for 3 years. When the audits got too close, they brought in Ethan to make the evidence disappear. But they hadn't counted on me, the paranoid data specialist who backed up everything, the one person they'd needed to remove to make their plan work. As the interview wrapped up, Agent Valdez found me in the observation room. "Your evidence is going to bury them all, Webb, the others, even Ethan if he hadn't flipped." "What happens now?" "Now," she smiled grimly, "now we pay Stratagem Solutions a visit, and this time we won't be knocking politely." I thought about my former colleagues, still scrambling to recover data that no longer existed in their systems, about the board members who thought they'd covered their tracks, about Ethan, who'd learned too late that he was just another disposable asset. Tomorrow morning, federal agents would walk through Stratagem's doors, and thanks to the evidence I'd preserved, they'd have everything they needed to take the company apart piece by piece. The trap was set. All that remained was to spring it. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that makes you think the universe is holding its breath. I'd barely slept, knowing what was coming. At 8:45 a.m., I received a text from Rita. "Something's happening. Black SUVs in the parking lot. Security won't let anyone leave." I was already at the FBI field office, preparing to accompany the raid team as a technical advisor. Agent Valdez had made it clear they needed someone who understood stratagem systems to ensure nothing else disappeared. "Ready?" she asked, checking her service weapon. "I've been ready since Friday," I replied. The drive to stratagem took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of remembering every dismissive smirk, every veiled threat, every moment Ethan and his handlers had tried to make me feel small for doing my job. Now their house of cards was about to collapse. We pulled into the parking lot at 9:13 a.m. precisely. I watched from the lead vehicle as agents surrounded the building. Through the glass lobby, I could see employees frozen at their desks, faces pale with shock. "FBI, nobody move. This is a federal raid." The words echoed across the parking lot as agents streamed through the entrance. Valdez turned to me. "You're with me. We're heading straight to the server room." Walking back into stratagem felt surreal. The same hallways where I'd been escorted out like a criminal 5 days ago now filled with federal agents securing evidence. Employees I'd worked with for years watched me pass, their expressions cycling through confusion, fear, and dawning comprehension. "Lauren," someone called. "What's happening?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. The truth would come out soon enough. The conference room where Ethan had held his efficiency meetings was now command central for the FBI. Through the glass, I saw Marcus Webb and 2 other board members already in custody, their expensive suits incongruous with the handcuffs. "Server room," Valdez reminded me. "We need to secure any remaining data before someone tries another purge." But when we reached the servers, we found chaos. Someone had been there first. Cables yanked out, drives scattered on the floor. The main backup array showed signs of hasty reformatting. "Shit," Valdez muttered. "How bad is this?" I knelt beside the damaged equipment, assessing quickly. "They panicked, tried to wipe everything manually, but," I smiled, "they didn't know about the shadow mirrors." "The what?" "I built redundancies into the redundancies. Hidden partitions that clone critical data. Ethan never found them because he didn't know to look." I pointed to an innocuous secondary unit. "That box contains rolling backups of everything from the past 90 days, including Monday's Defense Corps submission." Valdez immediately called for the forensic team. As they carefully extracted the drives, she turned to me. "How did you know to build hidden backups?" "Because I've worked in corporate America for 10 years. I know that when people start talking about efficiency, they usually mean liability. I protected the data from everyone, including my own management." We moved to the executive floor next. Ethan's office had been ransacked, probably by Ethan himself before his arrest, but I knew where to look. Behind the Pride of Place Efficiency Awards, I found what I was searching for: a hidden USB drive. "His insurance policy," I explained to Valdez. "He was too arrogant to think he'd need it, but too paranoid not to keep one." The drive contained exactly what we'd hoped: correspondence with Webb, detailed instructions on which files to delete, and most damning, records of the offshore accounts where the embezzled funds had been directed. By 11 a.m., the full scope of the conspiracy was clear. 3 board members, the previous CFO participating remotely from his retirement in Costa Rica, and 2 external contractors who'd helped wash the money. Millions stolen through manipulated defense contracts over 3 years. And Ethan. He'd been their perfect patsy, ambitious enough to follow orders, arrogant enough to think he was in control, and disposable enough to take the fall if needed. "Ms. Hayes." A familiar voice made me turn. The CEO, David Park, stood in the hallway, looking a decade older than when I'd last seen him. I need to apologize. We should have listened to you." "You should have," I agreed. "But you didn't, and now you're facing federal charges for negligence." His face crumpled. "The company will be destroyed. 400 employees." "The employees will be fine," Valdez interjected. "Companies under federal monitoring can continue operations, but the leadership, that's another story." As if to emphasize her point, 2 agents emerged from the boardroom with the CFO in custody. He'd been hiding in his office, apparently hoping the raid was just a bad dream. Rita found me by the break room, tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. "If you hadn't kept those files." "I did my job," I replied. "The job they fired me for doing?" The raid continued for hours. Computers seized, documents boxed, entire departments cordoned off. I walked through it all like a ghost, providing passwords, explaining file structures, identifying critical evidence. At one point, I passed the conference room where Ethan was being questioned again, this time in handcuffs. Our eyes met through the glass. His held a mixture of fear and something else, regret, understanding that he'd been outplayed by the very person he'd dismissed as a redundant obstacle. I didn't stop to analyze it. He'd made his choices. We all had. By 3 p.m., the initial raid was complete. 47 boxes of physical evidence, hundreds of terabytes of digital data, 5 arrests, with more warrants being prepared. Valdez found me in my old office, looking out at the parking lot where I'd been escorted away just days before. "We have everything we need," she said. "Your documentation, combined with what we found here, will ensure convictions." "What happens to the company?" "Federal oversight for 5 years minimum. New leadership, mandatory compliance training." She paused. "They'll need someone to rebuild their data integrity systems from scratch. Someone who understands both the technical and legal requirements." The implication hung in the air. I could return, help salvage what remained, be the hero who helped resurrect Stratagem from its own ashes. "They'll have to find someone else," I said finally. "I have a meeting with a competing firm tomorrow, one that values data protection as much as I do." Valdez smiled. "Can't say I blame you. But Lauren, what you did here keeping those files, documenting everything, you saved a lot of people from going down with this ship." As we walked out together, I took one last look at the Stratagem Solutions sign. The company would survive. Probably. The criminals would be prosecuted. The stolen money might even be recovered. But the culture that had allowed it all to happen, the blind worship of efficiency over ethics, that was harder to fix than any database. The real victory wasn't in the arrests or the evidence, it was in the proof that one person, doing their job with integrity, could stand against an entire system of corruption. And win. The knock came at 9:13 a.m., sharp and authoritative. 3 short raps that cut through the terrified silence of the conference room like gunshots. Through the glass doors, I could see the FBI badges before they even entered. "Federal agents, nobody move." I sat perfectly still in the corner, my laptop closed, hands visible on the table. Around me, the executive team that had gathered for Ethan's emergency meeting turned white as paper. The COO's coffee mug slipped from nerveless fingers, brown liquid spreading across pristine documents. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his mouth still open mid-sentence from whatever lie he'd been spinning about technical difficulties with the Defense Corps data. For the first time since I'd met him, he had no words. Ethan Cole, the lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and harder eyes, stepped forward. "Special Agent Sarah Valdez, FBI Financial Crimes Division, you're under arrest for wire fraud, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government." "This is a mistake," Ethan managed, his voice cracking. "I have documentation showing." "Save it for your lawyer," Valdez nodded to her partner, who moved behind Ethan with handcuffs. "Marcus Webb, you're also under arrest." Webb, the board member who'd hired Ethan, tried to bolt. He made it 3 steps before an agent by the door stopped him with laughable ease. The sight of a 70-year-old millionaire being pressed against glass walls while Miranda rights were read would have been comedic if it weren't so pathetic. "Now," Valdez announced to the room, "we need to speak with Lauren Hayes." Every head swiveled to me. I met their stares calmly, then looked directly at Agent Valdez. "I can help." The walk to my old office felt like a victory march. Employees pecked out of cubicles as our procession passed 2 agents, Valdez and me. Whispers followed in our wake. By tomorrow, the story would be legend. By next week, mythologized beyond recognition. But right now, in this moment, it was just justice. Valdez closed the door behind us. "Ms. Hayes, we've reviewed the materials you provided. Everything checks out. The hash values, the timelines, the evidence of data manipulation." She pulled out a tablet. "But we need the original files. Our forensic team found the servers wiped." I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed evidence bag containing 3 encrypted drives. Every file Ethan deleted, every document he modified, original hash values verified and documented. Chain of custody maintained. She actually smiled. You know this makes you the key witness in a federal case. I'm aware. The defense will come after you. They'll claim you're disgruntled, that you fabricated evidence, that you had unauthorized access. I opened my laptop and pulled up a file. Employment contract, section 12.3. As data integrity specialist, I was authorized to maintain independent backups of all critical systems, signed by the CEO, the general counsel, and ironically, Marcus Webb himself. You've thought of everything. I've had years to think about it. Every time someone prioritized profits over protocol, every time they dismissed security as paranoia, every time they called me difficult for doing my job correctly, I gestured toward the conference room. I knew this day would come, I just didn't know when. Valdez's partner knocked and entered. We've got a problem. Someone's trying to access the system remotely. IP address traces to Costa Rica. The previous CFO, I said immediately. He still has admin credentials. He's trying to destroy what's left. I pulled up another file. Here's his access history, SSH keys, and the back door he thinks nobody knows about. Can you stop him? Already did. I showed them my phone, displaying a custom monitoring app. I've been tracking every access attempt since Friday. He's locked out, but he doesn't know it yet. He's essentially performing every criminal action for your recording software while thinking he's covering tracks. Valdez stared at me. You've been running a honeypot. Insurance policy. I knew they'd panic when the heat came down. For the next hour, I walked them through everything. The 3-year embezzlement scheme, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, how they'd use defense contracts to wash money. Skimming percentages small enough to avoid automatic flags, but adding up to millions over time. Ethan was supposed to be their eraser, I explained. Delete the evidence, blame system failures, collect his bonus. He probably didn't even understand the full scope until it was too late to back out. And you? Valdez asked. They must have tried to buy you. They tried to fire me instead. Easier to eliminate a problem than corrupt it. I pulled up Ethan's emails about my redundancy. They underestimated how much I'd already preserved. A commotion outside made us all turn. Through the window, I could see more agents leading the CFO away in handcuffs. He'd been hiding in the supply closet, apparently thinking it was a clever move. My phone rang. The corporate lawyer, frantic. Lauren, the company needs those files. We're prepared to offer. I'm with the FBI, I interrupted. The files are evidence now. Maybe you should have valued them when you had them. I hung up and found Valdez watching me with something like admiration. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying doing my job without someone telling me it's unnecessary. She pulled out a document. Speaking of which, we need to formalize your cooperation. Consultant agreement with the FBI. Full immunity in exchange for testimony and technical assistance. The rate is substantial. I read the number. Triple what Stratagem had paid me. When do I start? You already have. Welcome to federal service, Ms. Hayes. As I signed the agreement, another knock came at the door. Rita peered in, eyes wide. Lauren, the whole building's in chaos. They're saying you... She stopped, seeing the FBI agents. Oh my God. You did it. You actually did it. I did my job, I corrected, just like I always have. Through the window, I watched them load Ethan into a federal vehicle. His perfect suit was wrinkled. His perfect hair mussed. His perfect confidence shattered. Our eyes met one last time through the glass. I saw the moment he understood not just that I'd beaten him, but how completely he'd been outplayed. He'd thought he was the chess master, moving pieces, sacrificing pawns. He never realized he was on my board the whole time. The convoy pulled away, taking with it 3 board members, 2 executives, and the architect of his own destruction. Behind them, forensic accountants poured into the building to begin the long work of untangling years of fraud. But my work here was done. I'd protected the data, preserved the truth, and waited for justice to arrive. It had taken exactly 3 hours from the moment the FBI knocked to the moment Ethan Cole learned what happens when you delete the evidence, but forget about the woman who saved it all. The paperwork took less than an hour. By noon, I was officially a consultant for the FBI Financial Crimes Division, with a badge that granted me access to finish what I'd started. But first, There was one more piece of business at Stratagem. The company's emergency board meeting was in session when I returned to the executive floor. Through the glass, I could see the remaining directors huddled around speakerphones, their lawyers scattered like protective shields. They were discussing damage control, federal oversight, the very survival of Stratagem Solutions. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. "You can't be here," someone started, then stopped as they saw my FBI consultant badge. "Actually, I can, and I have terms." David Park, the CEO who'd stood by while they destroyed my career, found his voice. "Terms, Lauren. We need those files. The FBI has them. But surely, the FBI has them because I gave them copies. I still have the originals." I let that sink in. "And I'm willing to provide them to help Stratagem survive, under certain conditions." The room erupted, lawyers whispering urgently, board members talking over each other. I waited until they exhausted themselves. First, my consulting contract, triple my previous salary, reporting directly to federal oversight, not company management. Second, full implementation of every security protocol Ethan stripped away, plus new ones I'll design. Third, a written apology in the company newsletter acknowledging that my termination was wrongful and that my actions saved the company. "That's extortion," one lawyer protested. "That's negotiation. You can accept, or you can try to reconstruct 3 years of financial data from scratch while under federal investigation. Your choice." They huddled, whispered, argued, but we all knew they had no real options. Without my files, Stratagem would bleed clients, face massive fines, possibly lose their license to handle classified data. "We accept," Park said quietly. I placed a single USB drive on the table. "Partial data set, enough to keep you operational for the next week. You'll get more as each of my conditions is met, in writing, with federal oversight approval." As I turned to leave, Park called out, "Why help us at all, after what we did?" I paused at the door. "Because 400 people work here who had nothing to do with your crimes. They don't deserve to lose their jobs because you valued efficiency over ethics." I looked back at the broken leadership. "But make no mistake, I'm not doing this for you." The walk to my car felt different this time, not the humiliated shuffle of a terminated employee, but the measured stride of someone who'd won completely. In the parking lot, I found Rita and a cluster of my former colleagues waiting. "Is it true?" Rita asked. "Did you really save everything?" "Every byte," I confirmed. "Every file Ethan thought he'd destroyed, every trail he thought he'd covered, all of it." "But how did you know?" I thought about how to answer that. How do you explain the instinct that comes from years of watching corporate leaders choose shortcuts over safety, the pattern recognition that develops when you've seen enough companies implode from their own greed? "Because that's what I do," I said simply. "I protect data, even from the people who own it." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where, just days ago, I'd been escorted out like a criminal. Now, federal agents were cataloging evidence in the building behind us, and the real criminals were facing decades in prison. My phone buzzed with messages, job offers from companies that had heard about the raid, interview requests from journalists, a text from Agent Valdez. "Costa Rica CFO arrested. Your honeypot caught him destroying evidence in real time. Beautiful work." But the message that mattered most came from an unknown number. "Ms. Hayes, this is Matthew Chen from the DOJ. Thanks to your preserved data, we've identified 12 additional companies involved in the money laundering ring. Your evidence didn't just save one case, it broke open an entire network. We'd like to discuss a permanent position." I sat in my car, reading that message, and allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Ethan had deleted the evidence thinking it would hide crimes. Instead, his actions had revealed them, highlighting exactly what needed preservation. As I drove away from Stratagem, for what would be the last time as an employee, I passed the federal vehicles still arriving, forensic accountants, data recovery specialists, investigators who would spend months untangling the web of fraud, all because one person had been too careful, too paranoid, too redundant to let critical data disappear. My phone rang one more time. Ethan's lawyer. "Ms. Hayes, my client would like to discuss a cooperation agreement. He has information about other companies, other executives involved, in exchange for leniency. Tell your client, I interrupted, that he should have thought about cooperation before he deleted evidence in federal cases, before he forged my signature, before he threatened my career for doing my job correctly. He's prepared to testify that you were set up, that the termination was specifically to remove you as an obstacle. I don't need his testimony. I have his emails, his access logs, his digital fingerprints on every deleted file. I have everything. Silence. Then, you knew this would happen. I knew someone who treated data protection as optional would eventually face consequences. I just made sure the evidence would survive to see that day. I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more testimonies, more untangling of the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded. But today, I'd won something more valuable than money or vindication. I'd proven that in a world of corporate sharks and efficiency experts, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one quietly making backups in the corner, the one they dismiss as paranoid, obsessive, redundant. Right up until the moment the feds knock on the door, and suddenly, everyone realizes that the only thing standing between the company and complete destruction is the woman with the encrypted drives. Ethan Cole thought he'd deleted the evidence. He'd only deleted his future. And me, I drove toward my new life with the FBI, leaving behind a company that would survive only because I'd been too stubborn to let anyone, no matter their title or authority, convince me that protecting the truth was unnecessary. Some people call that paranoia. I call it job security. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of justice served cold resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed corporate karma in action? Let me know in the comments.